Please be seated for a few announcements. So the schedule for this evening, right now we've got the second conference on the commandments that will be followed by a 15-minute break, approximately 7, probably realistically about 5 past 7. Then like last night, there will be a bell to bring everyone back in. And then approximately 7:15, probably realistically more 7:20, 25, we'll have the third conference on the commandments, followed by sermon number 4 on the mercy of God, which we definitely need to hear after last night's sermon on hell. Everything will be finished up realistically probably 8:30. And then I'll be back in the confessional again for as late as necessary this evening. I'd like to thank those who came this afternoon for confessions. So I'll do a book plug. I'll be doing the book signings again during the 15-minute break between the conferences this evening. There in the vestibule, for those who may not have had the opportunity to get one of the books of biography of Father Catherine on Sunday. So one way to learn about the Redemptorist Fathers and what we do is by reading this biography, which Angelus Press has published just this last June, and so I'll be signing copies of it during that break period. Father Catherine was a holy old Redemptorist. He was born 1898, and he died in 1989. He never said the Novus Ordo Mass. He helped out the Society of St. Pius X in California from 1975 until his death 33 years ago. And I knew Father Catherine for the last 13 years of his life, from about 1975, 76, when I first met him when I was in kindergarten. And he died my first year in college at St. Mary's, Kansas. So I knew him all my years growing up. And of course, he's the reason why I'm a Redemptorist. So the biography, it goes over his vocation. It starts off explaining about his devout family. 6 of the 8 children became religious, and then the 2 other boys in the family both married the same woman. And you find out about that in the book. So he was born in the Tyrol in Austria, in the Austrian Alps, and his family had to move to Chicago in 1903 because their house had burnt down in Tyrol. The book then continues with his life as a young Redemptorist, and then explains how he fought for the traditional Catholic faith and liturgy after Vatican II, and how he helped the SSPX until his death. So I started collecting stories and anecdotes about Father Catherine. It was a few years after his death. I started collecting them back in 1997, 98, when I did a 20-page short biography of him at that time. And I've continued collecting stories over the years. And last year, it was around Easter time, I was talking to the modern Redemptorist archivist back in Philadelphia. And he said, I've seen Father Catherine's file here, and I can send you all the information from it, which he did. He scanned more than 200 pages of documents, letters, etc. for me, and a lot of that has worked its way into this biography. Angelus Press was happy to publish the biography since it fills in the important history of those early days of tradition in Northern California, because most of the SSPX chapels in Northern California were either started by Father Catherine or he said Mass at them and helped out the society and all those different chapels. And I'm very excited to know that others will get to know and love Father Catherine now too. So while Angelus Press is selling these for $16.95 online, I am offering them to you for $12 a piece this week while I'm here, and you can also get an autographed copy of that. So I will be signing books in the vestibule during the intermission between the conferences this evening. Good, so we'll pick up where we left off yesterday with the commandments, starting with the 4th commandment, honor thy father and thy mother. Let's start off with the sins of children towards their parents. Disobedience and disrespect are normally venial sins. However, there are 3 cases when it can become mortal. Firstly, the case of grave disobedience, and the typical example for this is a teenager who sneaks out of the house to go on a date without the parents' permission. And the reason why this would be grave matter is because the parents have the right and the duty to know where and with whom their children are. A second case of grave matter is grave dishonor to one's parents. Typical example of this is a teenager or young adult who slaps a parent in the face. The third case is where a teenager or a young adult gives grave grief to their parents through their immoral behavior. All of these would be grave matter. Then let's take a look at the sins of parents concerning their children. If you give bad example to your children by staying away from the sacraments for a long time, this would be grave matter. If you neglect the baptism or confirmation or Catholic education of a child, also that would be grave matter. If you neglect explaining the facts of life, suitable to the age, obviously, this can easily be grave matter, and parents oftentimes might not realize this. The old saying was, better a year too early than a day too late, and that is very true. What if you fail to correct the faults of your children? It depends, and of course we're only talking about minors under the age of 18. So if a child is committing mortal sins, of course you have an obligation to correct them. Usually it's going to be a case of venial sin. And here, parents, you want to avoid 2 extremes. On the one hand, you don't want to be just jumping down your child's throat for every little thing. That only discourages them. On the other hand, you want to avoid letting them get away with murder also. So moderation is the key word here. What is certain is that parents, you must correct the habitual faults of your minor children. For example, if a child is developing a habit of frequent lying or cheating or petty theft or bad language, does need to be corrected. Here's another principle related to the 4th commandment, that parents are responsible for the sins of your children, meaning minor kids, of course, if you could have prevented those sins. Now, where even very good parents can sometimes be negligent without even realizing it, is with regards to the occasions of sin in the home. And there are 2 main areas of occasions of sin that you want to be vigilant over. The first is with regards to the media and modern technology. Obviously, media and modern technology are not something bad in themselves, but they are easily misused. That's why you want to be careful with regards to the television. I would simply say get rid of the television. Of course, I don't suppose nowadays, in 2022, many people use television. It's all on the phones now, isn't it? So with regards to music, know what music your kids, and when I'm saying kids, I mean minors, under the age of 18. Know what your kids are listening to. What kind of books are they reading? What kind of books are there on their, if they've got phones? I hope they don't have phones. I hope they don't have phones. Please, God, no. I hope that you don't have phones. Honestly, I think I've lived in California for many, many years, and I'll be blunt, the stupidity of, oftentimes it's like uncles and aunts who, oftentimes they're not traditional Catholics themselves, and they think, oh, my nephew and my niece don't have their own smartphone. My traditionalist Catholic brother or sister is abusing their children. I've got the great idea of giving my nephew or niece a smartphone for their birthday or for Christmas. That way they can keep up with all the worldly stuff. Incredible stupidity with a capital S. Honestly. So I will come back to this during the mission, okay? The importance of internet blockers. I would simply say, obviously, teenagers under the age of 18, honestly, in my opinion, I don't think they need smartphones, honestly. That's my opinion. Maybe I'm being just an old dinosaur, but I don't think it's necessary, honestly. Too many occasions of sin out there. Certainly, though, dear parents, you want to make sure that you are vigilant about all of these things. So with regards to the internet blockers are necessary. Also, to be checking your children, even if they've got just regular phones, the old-fashioned flip phone and like that, who are their contacts? What kind of text messages are they sending? Pictures, etc. It's important for you to be vigilant about this, because if you do protect the innocence of your children, God will bless you abundantly. Now, besides modern technology, the second area of the occasions of sin that parents can sometimes be negligent about is dating rules. So dating is not meant as an opportunity for a wonderful smooch fest. No, that's a worldly way of looking at it. No, dating is meant as a preparation to receive the sacrament of matrimony. And therefore, a young man may not begin dating until he's financially capable of supporting a wife and family. So ordinarily, if a man is going into a profession, he's going through college, he's a year away from graduating, he's got a job lined up for himself after graduation, he's 21 or whatever, at that point he could start dating. A young man who's going into a trade right after high school, it depends. If he's going to be able to support a family, yes, he could start dating at that point. For young ladies, they simply need to be emotionally capable of motherhood. Personally, I think most of our girls do have that emotional maturity by the age 18. Not that I would suggest that they run after the first Joe six-pack who comes out across their way. Now, if these criteria are not met, ordinarily it would be a mortal sin for a teenager to begin dating because of the occasion of sin involved. That's the idea here. And so that's why teenagers in general, I don't say in particular, in general, teenagers are forbidden to date. Obviously, as social beings, they need to be around people their own age. That's to be encouraged as groups. They simply must not have this pairing off before they're actually ready to start considering matrimony. Then going on to the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. The principle here is pretty obvious, that God is the author of life, and therefore only He has sovereign rights over its use. So this is why the sins of birth control, abortion, sterilization, in vitro fertilization, and euthanasia, or cooperation in any of these sins will certainly be mortal. Moreover, with the sin of abortion, there is also an excommunication attached, not only to the one who has the abortion herself, but to anyone who cooperates in procuring the abortion. With regards to the sin of sterilization, because this is also a sin of injustice against one's spouse, there is actually a grave obligation to have the sterilization reversed if it is still possible. Sometimes there are circumstances that prevent the reversal. If you're ever in doubt about this, simply ask a priest. Nowadays, there is more talk about euthanasia, and so we should mention the means of preserving life. And I'm going to really dumb these rules down. I'm oversimplifying them, but it's just to make it a little bit easier for you to understand it tonight. The idea is that you take these generalized rules, and then if you are put in the situation where you're having to take care of a loved one in their last years, then you speak to a priest about your particular situation, because no two cases are alike. That's why the priest has to understand the particular circumstances of each case to know what is allowed, what is not allowed here. So there are ordinary means of preserving life and extraordinary means of preserving life. The ordinary means are three: air, water, and nutrition must be given a dying person in whatever way can conveniently be administered. Now, as opposed to the extraordinary means of preserving life, which are extraordinary either because they're too expensive or too painful, etc. Normally, these are not obligatory but optional. Again, I have oversimplified these rules just to give you an idea. So if you are in a situation, as I say, where you are taking care of a loved one in their last years, speak to a priest to make sure that you're doing the right thing in God's eyes. There's another principle with regards to the fifth commandment, which deals with drink and drug abuse. Here's the principle: that God has given to mankind the use of reason. That means we know the difference between right and wrong, and therefore we do not have the right to deprive ourselves of the use of reason without a very grave motive. Let's give an example where it is okay. Let's say that you're going into the hospital to have an operation. Of course you take the anesthesia to knock you out. That's a sufficient reason. But no matter what your spouse is like, no matter what your kids are like, no matter what your boss is like, it's not allowed to get tipsy or drunk. So let's take a look at this. The relaxed feeling that comes from using alcohol in moderation, and that's the key word, moderation, this is completely okay because you are still in complete control of your faculties. The idea is that God has given us alcohol not to abuse it, but so that by relaxing our mind and body, we can serve Him better and carry our cross more faithfully. That's the idea. Now, tipsiness, that's when you still know the difference between right and wrong, but it's beginning to get fuzzy. That's a venial sin. That's what we need to avoid. Whereas actual drunkenness, drop down drunk, loss of memory, you were dancing on the table or you were lying under it, obviously you lost your reason. Yes, that would be mortally sinful. Likewise, the drug abuse, drugs that warp the mind, yes, of course this will be sinful. With regards to confessing sins of drunkenness and drug abuse, you also need to confess how many persons were scandalized. And also, in the case of drug abuse, did you share the drug with anyone else? Because those are extra sins. What about smoking tobacco products like cigarettes? Normally, it's not sinful. However, if there is a family history of lung disease, it could become a sin against prudence. Gluttony will almost always be a venial sin, only in the case where a person deliberately provokes vomiting, especially if it happens frequently. That can become mortal because of the damage done to the esophagus. With regards to scandal, if you scandalize persons in a grave way, this will be a mortal sin. If it's with regards to a slight matter, it will be a venial sin. The occasions of sin. You remember what those are from your catechism. An occasion of sin is a person, place, or thing that, more often than not, leads you to offend God gravely. There is a grave obligation for us to avoid what we call the unnecessary, proximate occasions of mortal sin. Now, it's true that the occasions of sin will differ from person to person, largely on account of one's age, one's sex, a lot of other different kinds of circumstances in life. But there are certain occasions of sin that are very common for many people. We can mention the television, the internet, number one occasion of sin nowadays, I believe. Bad companions, especially for college-age people. People who have a tendency towards alcoholism, walking into a bar would be an occasion of sin. So as I say, the occasions of sin will differ from person to person. So the idea is that we all know what is an occasion of sin for ourselves and that we avoid those occasions of sin. Anger will normally be a venial sin, only in the case where it really becomes violent, like two guys having a punch 'em up, trying to break each other's bones. Then in that case, it would become grave matter. Hatred, in a theological sense, means wanting someone to burn in hell forever. Now, obviously, if you really do want someone to be damned, that would be a mortal sin. Usually, however, when we say, I hate so-and-so, we normally don't mean it literally in the theological sense. We simply mean, I really dislike his guts, which is going to be venially sinful at the most. Moreover, if the hatred is directed not towards the person, but towards the actions and the behaviors, well, we have to hate sin. We must hate sin. Yeah, that applies to certain politicians, shall we say, who call themselves Catholics. We have to hate what they're doing. Are you listening, Pelosi? Abuse, whether physical, emotional, sexual, or whatever, will always be sinful. Attempted suicide, by its nature, of course, is grave matter. However, sometimes there can be a lack of sufficient reflection or full consent of the will. We can also mention mutilation. Have you ever heard a sermon about mutilation? You're going to get it right now. And we're talking about tattoos and piercings. So, because our bodies are temples of the Holy Ghost, it would normally be a venial sin to get a tattoo or some sort of body piercing. Moreover, if a tattoo is blasphemous or immodest, it would be a mortal sin, and there would be an obligation to have the tattoo removed. Now, pierced ears for ladies, that's allowable by custom. Pierced ears for men are not. Nowadays, you get nose rings, you get tongue studs, you get belly button rings. These things are just gross. That brings us to the 6th and 9th commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. And here I'll try to be very discreet. But what is essential is to understand the underlying principle that God has given to mankind the reproductive power, not primarily for our own personal satisfaction, but primarily for the continuation of the human race. That's why any sin against these two commandments will be offensive to God by their very nature because of the grave disorder from God's plan. This is also why parents must educate your children. Again, it will be incrementally at the appropriate age so that the children can avoid offending God and can learn how to practice Christian virtue. Then let's briefly look over some states of life. Those who are civilly divorced are forbidden to date because they're still married in God's eyes. Those who are allowed to date must avoid the unnecessary occasions of sin. For example, dating couples must avoid being alone in private for a long time. It's too dangerous. Likewise, they must avoid prolonged signs of affection. Please remember that passionate kissing outside of marriage is grave matter. For married couples, remember that the marriage debt is a grave obligation, and to deny the marriage debt would ordinarily be a mortal sin. It's true there are certain exceptions. We also make a distinction between an outright denial of the debt, which would be mortally sinful, and a mere deferral of the debt, where you both agree to put it off in order to be able to, deferral, so that you are able to come together again afterwards, and as long as neither of you is placed in an occasion of sin because of this. With regards to NFP, or what's referred to as rhythm, it is prudent, though not strictly obligatory, to speak to your confessor first. Please remember that temptations are not sins. You can certainly mention temptations in confession, but do specify that you did try to fight them off. Desires are also distinctly different from thoughts, and therefore they should ideally be confessed separately. With regards to the object of a thought or desire, the priest will always presume a person of the opposite sex. If not, it must be confessed because this is part of the species of the sin. With regards to looks, a first look is oftentimes involuntary. You're walking down the street and you happen to notice someone. As long as you're not taking the second glance, as long as you're not staring or gawking, that can simply be a temptation. Whereas the second glance, yeah, that's voluntary. Concerning words, for example, jokes and boasting, you also want to confess how many persons were scandalized and were there any children present, which makes it a much worse sin of scandal. Concerning actions, please remember that incomplete actions are still mortal sins. It must also be specified whether it was alone or with another. If it was with another, the priest will always presume a person of the opposite sex. If not, it must be specified in confession because this is part of the species of the sin. Likewise, if it was someone that you were related to. Also, whether neither, one, or both were married, because this is what makes the difference between the sin of fornication, two unmarried persons, single adultery, one married, the other unmarried, and double adultery, both married but to different parties. Also, if there was anything unnatural, because that is part of the species of the sin. However, please do not confess unnecessary details. Concerning the virtue of modesty, there are two principles. The first principle applies to both men and ladies, that we are never allowed to lead others into temptation by the way we dress. The second principle applies for ladies. A lady will want to guard her femininity, and therefore she will want to dress ladylike, Mary-like. So, with regards to the sin of immodesty, we can say that anything very tight or revealing, so anything provocative, would certainly be grave matter. And remember, parents, you are responsible for the way that your teenagers dress. Concerning dancing, St. Alphonsus de Liguori says that dancing by its nature expresses joy, not lust, which is why certain kinds of dancing will normally be okay. Here in the United States, most kinds of square dancing or folk dancing, where there's only touching the hands, normally this would be all right. However, any kind of dancing that is immodest or provocative, we can use the term gyrations, would certainly be inappropriate. Concerning music, first of all, you look at the lyrics. If the lyrics are bad, if they promote impurity, drugs, suicide, etc., you have no business listening to it. Concerning romance novels, dear ladies, be careful of what you have in the home, and because your daughters will notice your reading material. Even the things that are called Christian romances, even if it's not horrendous, it's simply inappropriate. Now, the priest will always try to avoid asking questions about the 6th and 9th commandments. He doesn't want to have to. He'll only ask questions for two reasons. One, if it really is necessary to assure the validity of the sacrament, and secondly, if it will help you to get through a temptation. However, on your part, as the penitent, if you are ever in doubt whether something is sinful or not for your state of life, that goes for whether you are single, dating, engaged, married, separated, divorced, widowed. Always feel free that you can ask the priest either in the confessional or even outside the confessional, because the priest knows God's law and he can discreetly explain to you what you need to know in order to save your soul. Now, before our 15-minute break, if you will please take out your blue hymnal, please stand and turn to number 192. Let's go to Saint Joseph and ask him for the grace of innocence, purity for ourselves and for our families. Number 192. Hail, holy Joseph, hail, chaste spouse of Mary, hail. Pure as the lily flower in Eden's peaceful vale. Hail, holy Joseph, hail. You were God's chosen one. To you the Word made flesh was subject as a son. Hail, holy Joseph, hail, O friend of angels, hail. Assist the hearts that faint, and guide the steps that fail. Hail, holy Joseph, hail, Prince of the house of God. May his best graces be by your dear hands bestowed. Hail, holy Joseph, hail, teach us our flesh to